like to start this video by thanking someone who very graciously offered to edit it for free, and that would be a big thank you to Druida for making this video edited and possible to release as it is. So thank you so much. And without further ado, please enjoy my sort of commentary and reaction to another YouTuber. Kind of like the transparency of Ghost Nox and just sort of like, ooh, floating around. Yes, oh, I'm hidden. 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 I don't know, is that, yeah, kind of visible, kind of not. Yeah, it's this one. I kind of want to use this one for the ghost because I think the little bouncing makes the visual, like the movement is more visually noticeable. You tell me, hiding in your wife now. Anyway, so yeah, let's take a little look at this video because I've been meaning to watch this one and I just haven't gotten around to it.
Let's talk about some of my horror movie icks. These are the things that really rub me the wrong way when I'm watching a horror movie, and I can't stand them. So I saw Emma from Spooky Astronauts do this video a little while back, and I absolutely
Oh,
loved it, and I loved her
oh my
icks,
goodness,
despite
that's
disagreeing with some of them. I'm sure she'll disagree with some of these as well. But I knew when I
there we
saw that
go.
I had to do it, so
You
I've been
know,
collecting and thinking of what are my icks when it comes to
why
horror
is it?
movies. And these are a lot of things that I just don't understand why we're still continuing to do them
Is
in
that better?
modern day movies in 2024. Why are we still doing these things? So these are going to be in no particular order, but the first one that I could think of, I thought of actually because of The Strangers Chapter 1. I know I said I was done talking about that movie until the end of the year, but I'm clearly not. It's always going to be an example of a terrible movie
So,
in every aspect.
so I actually really like horror movies. However, I tend to have a very high standard when it comes to horror movies. Um, for the most part, because like I think horror is a lot more than just jump scares and gore and like special effects. I think there's like a real element of horror that doesn't come through in a lot of new media. Um, it's sort of like a little, how would I say this? A very psychological and emotional front to horror movies. Um, a lot of people like to kind of shit on like the Blair Witch Project for being like a horror movie that is hard to follow. It's basically a bunch of teenagers crying in the woods. Nothing ever really happens, and I think that's a really unfair critique of the Blair Witch Project. Like, when you really think about it, like, one of the most primal fears is being lost in the woods. The idea that you can just walk in circles and even with a map, even without a map, whether you have a compass or not, you just get fundamentally lost. Even if you think you know the way, um, not being able to get out of the trees, not being able to find your way back to like a familiar location or reaching a familiar location, but not knowing where your bearings are, that is a very rational, a very human, and a very like primal fear that I think the movie does really well. Like the Blair Witch Project does a really good job at uh kind of encapsulating like that desperation of like being lost. And then like you add the element of like the witches in the woods, right? And that comes from a lot of like also that comes a lot also from the human side of like superstition, like what lurks beyond the woods, what hides in unknown places. And I think that the Blair Witch Project, for the most part, kind of satisfies a lot of the horror movie um, boxes that would make a good horror movie. The thing about the thing, I don't fear animals. No, I don't fear animals in general, but then how do you get someone who doesn't have a fear of animals to fear something like the alien, like the xenomorphs from Alien, or the thing from The Thing. Um, you kind of give them a sense of intelligence. You give them a reason to fear them, right? The thing is, like, there is a healthy understanding that this is a corporeal animal, it is an alien animal, and it is a hostile animal, but that understanding takes away some of the fear. What gives those creatures more fear for the audience is their ability to um, be intelligent. Because humans tend to have this superiority complex, thinking that we are the smartest things on the planet. I hate to break it to everyone in chat. Humans are intelligent, yes, but our intelligence um, is not as domineering as I think a lot of people think it is. I think you can look at a lot of animals and you can show expressions of like animals being just as intelligent in terms of emotion, in terms of rationale, in terms of problem solving. Um, the thing that makes humans so dominant is our ability to alter our environment. It is our ability to create and use tools. We are not the only animals that can use tools, but I mean, opposable thumbs go a long way in doing that. And uh, I guess also like there is a sense that um, our alteration of our environment and our constant changing and adaptation to our conditions actually hurts us more than it actually benefits us. We see that a lot with just sort of like our social structures. Um, Currently, right now, you would think a very intelligent society, a very intelligent species, would not have a housing crisis. Right, so this is an interesting take, is like at the beginning of that movie, spoiler alert to anyone who hasn't seen it, at the beginning of The Thing, the alien monster actually poses as a dog and then meets the main cast as a dog, and a hunter runs up to the group, speaking, I can't remember what language it is, but they're speaking in a different language, saying, "That's not a dog, that's not a dog, get away from it, that's an alien, it'll kill you, get away from that dog." And they just kind of dismiss the hunter as like some crazy local who, has been out in the snow for too long.
Helvete, kom der vekk! Det har ikke en bikkje i! Det er en slags ting! Det imiterer en bikkje! Det er ikke mekanikk!
Um, and then, as events unfold, you find out that the thing is a rather intelligent, um, a rather parasitic, and a rather good at camouflaging predator that can not just mimic human behavior, but can also take on the appearance and behaviors of any living creature. Um, and so, like, when you look at it, you think, oh, well, it's just a mindless beast, but it's not. It knew. It didn't just choose the dog initially at the beginning of the film because it thought, oh, dog easy, dog behavior good, dog behavior easy, dog optimal. It chose the dog because it recognized that people, on average, tend to have a more open and receptive disposition towards canines as opposed to another human. Like, imagine if the thing decided to mimic the hunter instead of the dog. Well, one, the dog would have been alerted that that wasn't a human because dogs have incredibly stronger senses than us. So one, the dog posed a threat to the thing as sort of a like detector of sorts. And two, the research crew in that movie wouldn't have really had a reason to really take the hunter seriously in any case. I mean, they didn't when he was human. Imagine if it was like an alien trying to pretend to be a human, trying to get them to be like hey, yeah, you random hunter out in the middle of the snow dune, who just sort of appeared out of nowhere, with a dog kind of aggressively barking at it. Like, yeah, you come on in. You come help us. It's like, no, the alien knew that the threat was the dog, and that um by imitating the dog, it had a better chance at, you know, killing everyone else and eating them. Um, and that's kind of a unique take on things, is just that the scariest thing oftentimes isn't just sort of the aggression, it's the intelligence to trick us. Ooh. Oh, I don't like that. Here. No. Yeah, we'll go here.
Aspect, including keeping the female protagonist pretty. I hate when they feel this pressure to keep
Agreed.
the protagonist, especially if they're female,
Right off the
usually
bat.
they're female,
Agreed.
attractive and beautiful and like unscathed, as if she didn't just do something that would obviously mess up her makeup. Now, I'm not discounting the
100%
fact that
agreed.
like sex appeal and horror go hand in hand. That's been the case probably since the 80s. I feel like really made that correlation and that relationship between the two. It's not my favorite thing, but I do acknowledge that that is an important aspect.
So, a point on this, because my thoughts on this are I do have a thought on this, is that one of the biggest complaints I have, are these really stereotypical cliches you find in horror. Um, there's like when you put something super familiar that you see repeated in every single sort of depiction of a genre, it takes away the effect of what you're trying to do. I 100% agree. Like, why is every female protagonist in every horror movie super gorgeous and also kind of dumb? They kind of actually, I really liked what The Cabin in the Woods does, because that is a parody of horror. I think a lot of people like they classify The Cabin in the Woods as horror, but it's actually a parody. It's a parody of horror, and it just kind of does horror better than other horror movies because it's a parody. And so because they're playing up the tropes to an exaggerated extent, which somehow actually makes the tropes work better. Um, they kind of do this where like they have all these hot 20 something year olds being played by hot 30-year-olds because you always have to age up everyone for some reason, I don't know. um but you had these all these different archetypes. You had your your dumb stoner, your quote unquote virginal innocent woman. You had the hot dumb blonde who's going to hook up with the hot, one of the hot studs. But anyways, yeah, I do agree. Like, we need to stop these like aesthetic sort of appeal tropes we see in a lot of these movies.
Of horror and why some people do watch it are for those things. But when they go out of their way to like touch up their makeup between takes or make them as attractive as possible, and what I'm talking about specifically in that movie is she takes a shower, decides to blow dry her hair again in the middle of the woods alone at night after a weird encounter, smokes a little weed, decides to take a shower and do all this stuff. Why would you do that in a strange cabin in the middle of the woods? I don't know. But then afterwards she has makeup on again, like clearly
Exactly.
has makeup
That
on.
is
Maybe some people wouldn't necessarily notice because it's very natural makeup, but why does she have to have like a hairstyle? She literally just washed her hair and blow dried it, and it has curls in it now. Like something
yeah,
obviously
that's
happened here in between takes to make her more beautiful. And that's just not necessary. Another great example of this is
Eyes and start.
no.
Megan Fox in Till Death. That was one of the things that really took me out of that movie, was the fact that they could not let Megan Fox get ugly. If that was even physically possible for that woman to be ugly. Like, why do we have to make sure the blood is placed strategically on her face? And then
So yeah, again, this is a point. If you have, so there's nothing wrong with casting someone, uh, you know, I'm going to say objectively attractive as someone who is omnisexual. I will say that everyone in existence can be objectively attractive. Everyone. That being said, if you cast someone who stereotypically tends to be objectively attractive, like Megan Fox, um, you don't always have to play into that trait. Sometimes downplaying that trait goes a long way because it makes the, pretty girl trope more relatable and it makes you kind of put yourself in their position and you can actually do a lot writing wise with that. A good example of this would be The Picture of Dorian Gray, where the literal like plot of that story, by Oscar Wilde, is about a vain, beautiful individual who curses themselves with um vain sort of like every mark of time, every sin they commit gets marked on the portrait and not on themselves as they, dive into debauchery, and everyone around him sees him as some beautiful angel-esque sort of perfection. Meanwhile, his self-portrait slowly degrades and dehumanizes the point in general.
Touch up her makeup, make sure her makeup is still flawless after that encounter, after that experience. Why is she still not like, her mascara should be messed up. Like there's a lot of things. And they made sure
Agreed.
she stayed really, really
100%
pretty.
agreed.
And I don't know if that was her doing, like her preference, or Madeline Petch's preference, or if it was literally just the filmmakers being like, nope, we gotta touch up your makeup now. It got too messed up in that scene with all the blood. When the blood got on your face, it messed up your makeup a little bit, so we're gonna fix that. Next horror ick, you already knew this was gonna be on here, a specific kind of jump scare. Bird jump scares. Whether they're flying by.
Um, on initial review, I half agree, I half don't. Um, I like the symbolic themes of birds. The funny bird, no, the funny bird, oh no, the funny bird. I agree and I disagree. Um, for one, I think horror relies a lot on symbolism, and birds tend to have a lot of symbolic meaning, especially in terms of omens. Because an albatross is an interesting bird with a lot of sailor lore around it. They are very they're birds related to a lot of omens, good and bad, depending on which sort of lores you're kind of looking at. But I think for the most part, an albatross isn't necessarily malicious, but does warn of bad omens on the horizon. Um, However, I think like the bird taking off trope with an albatross would be kind of a good indication that let's say you have a story and you have a sailor about to go on sea on you know, a grim looking ship with birds are literal dinosaurs. You can't convince me otherwise. They are I don't think people realize just how much variation birds have and just how crazy some of them can get. Flamingos live in some of the most inhospitable environments on the planet, and they eat like krill. They eat like microscopic krill that turns them pink. Like that's insane. They live in like an acidic look. It's either acidic or like super caustic. Either way, it's like if you were to go in there and breathe that air, you'd probably die in like a few minutes. I'd have to do some more research, but I do know that flamingos are kind of freaking wild for how goofy they look. Um, but then there's also like the ghost owl. I think it's called a ghost owl. Leave my pink guys away from me. Oh, Drew, do you like the flamingos? I love flamingos. Truth be told, I love pretty much all animals. But I acknowledge how crazy some of them can be, how absolutely wild. But anyways, this whole bird trope, I have a feeling she's gonna have a pretty base take on it. Like she's gonna say like the things I kind of already said. Um, but I kind of half agree, I half don't with this take.
in the frame. And what's even more annoying when it comes to bird jump scares is when they do fly by and they scare us, not them. Us, not the character. I hate that. The music, the booming.
Agreed, 100% agreed. If I'm getting scared, the character should also get scared. I think you can't have a successful horror movie without that relation to the audience with the main characters. Um, if if I think like one of the biggest things I think was again was it The Omen? Where was I? Oh yeah, so The Haunting of Hill House. Um, that that story revolves heavily around, I would say, the disjointed narration of it. Um, the events that take place in that story, I think, really, revolve around childhood flashbacks and sort of the idea of memory not always being what it seems, which is a very human thing. I challenge anyone to remember accurately events that happened 10, 10, 12, 15 years ago, and remember every memory as crystal clear as the day it happened, in a sense.
Loud noise when the bird flies by and it kind of startles the main character, but it definitely is supposed to startle us. That's stupid. You're obviously, that doesn't make sense in the story, in the world. Again, takes me right out of it. Hitting a window, that's a classic. Do that one time in Hollywood, but the fact that it's in so many movies. I just watched a movie the other day and it did that. And again, it came out in like 2000 or 2001. It's called Down with Naomi Watts. Ridiculous elevator movie, by the way. I had a great time with it. Not a great movie, but it was fun. And they did the bird
Yeah.
jump scare. But, that was like into.
Another thing I want to point out, you can enjoy a goofy horror movie. You can enjoy like if it doesn't matter if the horror movie you're watching was meant to be taken seriously and it ends up failing in that regard, you can still enjoy a quote unquote failed horror movie. Some of the best horror movies I think I watch are super campy, and that's just because they're fun to engage with. A horror movie can be fun to engage with, um, while also not being super scary at all. And I would say that would be a successful horror movie. Um, me and my cousin, we love to joke, or not joke, but we both kind of have a love for like B-list horror movies. I find the B-list horror movies tend to be the best in the sort of genre. Not because they, overtly scare me to, my wits' end. Some of them actually do. But mostly because I can engage with them a whole lot. You can find scenes that are just sort of overly played out that are just absolutely hilarious. And then, you know, that hilarity just kind of, it brings you back into the movie. It is a moment of relatability. It is a moment of humorous relatability, which maybe wasn't the intent of the, director or the producer. But that might just be the sort of thing that saves the movie. Um, A Cabin in the Woods was a parody, and its success and its high rating uh, largely in part played into how humorous it was. It was very much like oh God, how do I say this? Uh, it the engagement of the characters being overtly dumb or overtly dumb or overly like rational, like the stoner being like, I found the gas cord. They were drugging us, and because my drug tolerance is so high, I was immune to the effects. Like, that is so quirky and goofy. It works because we can relate to the stoner being like, oh yeah, like I feel like I would also kind of notice some tomfuckery going around.
2001. So I don't know. The most recent example that I can think of with the bird jump scare was in The Watchers. Now, they're there is some argument that it could have been necessary because of the situation. Obviously, the birds are fleeing the forest because of the creatures. So yes, they will be flying by. So that's fine. But then there was a jump scare later on in like a dark environment, and a bird just flies out of nowhere and startles the protagonist and us. And that was completely unnecessary. That one was unnecessary. The forest scene with all the birds flying, that's fine. The one in like the cave, we don't need that. Next is an ick that has only recently become an ick, because I used to enjoy this. I feel like the first time you experience this, it's like super mind bending and wild, and it's just like throws you for a loop. And that is a dream sequence. Everything was just a dream. I feel like they used to be fine because they were genuinely surprising at the time, but now when it happens, I feel like it's just annoying and kind of a cop out for bad writing. You can still do them and have
I do agree about the bad writing. I feel like a lot of these icks really boil down to lazy writing, because I think a lot of people think writing a good horror narrative would be easy. You throw some cliches in there, you throw some tropes, you throw a big bad guy, you throw some fear into the characters, bada bing, bada boom, you're done. Maybe you add a bit of gore. Who knows? And that's not really the case. The irony of horror is that people think it's an easy genre to write, and so they will write really shitty horror, thinking it is the standard. Um, when oftentimes horror, I think, is one of the most difficult genres to write. And because of that, you have a lot of really bad horror narratives that are sort of like the staple. And so people think that the staple is the set standard, and it's really not. Um, but it does come down to like your horror is lazy writing. Um, um, the dream sequence can be super terrifying if done right. Um, for example, like Friday the 13th conceptually is all dream sequence and is a horrifying notion that like a serial killer can ascend into like the, ghostly realm and then, invade people's dreams and then kill them in their dreams, killing them for real. Um, but then you watch the movie and it's just super goofy, super campy, kind of funny. And then you kind of, look at other movies, sort of like I think kind of the big dream sequence one. Oh, I don't like myself there. Let's go. mm, Let's go here. I'm gonna invade chat a little bit. Hello, I'm in your space chat. Uh, um, I think a movie that does dream sequences really well is Inception. And Inception isn't on the face of it a horror movie, but they use the dream sequences in Inception as a narrative tool. It's not just an environment, it's not just a sequence, it is a narrative tool for the plot in which the audience is constantly guessing, are you in a dream? Are you not in a dream? What's going on? It sows that doubt into you, um, which allows a lot of engagement. And a lot of horror is just engagement. You have to get your audience engaged with the story you're trying to tell. If your audience isn't engaged the proper way in the story you're trying to tell, you won't you won't get anywhere with it.
them be effective, but they cannot be the major twist in a story. They
Exactly.
cannot be the major
Agreed.
plot point. They have to be
Agreed.
a minor little thing, like, oh, they dreamt that. Let's throw in some horror elements into the dream because it's fictional. I appreciate that when they do that, because then they can really push it because it's within a dream, and then you think like,
kind of
oh, this is
disagree.
getting
I
weird,
think
and then they wake up
should
and it's
can
fine.
serve a
That can
narrative
happen in
purpose
like the
and
middle
can
of the
be a
movie.
big focal
It
point.
cannot be the major twist anymore. We don't need to be doing that as a twist. Again, I used to
Has
enjoy
to be done
dream
correctly.
sequences, and
Has
I
to be done
still do at
correctly.
times.
I
They
think
can
there's
still
an
be
asterisk
done.
next to that ick
But
for
we
me.
have to be really smart with them because we don't want them to be a cop out. Next up, you, again, if you've been watching for a while, knew this was going to be on here. Mental illness. Mental illness as a whole reason. Again, with the dream sequence, it can't be the excuse. It cannot be the plot twist. It can't be the major plot point. You cannot exploit.
I have some not quite sure how much I want to comment on this one. Um, as someone who has had depression and anxiety, um, I think adding mental illness into a horror narrative is often done in a harmful way. I think that it stigmatizes, and I don't think that is effective, nor do I think it is appropriate. That being said, you can have horror stories that focus on different mental illnesses that are not only respectful, but also can like lend an someone who might not be going through that mental illness a window into what it's actually like in a respectful way that actually like helps individuals um kind of unstigmatize. I think mental illness in horror can only be done appropriately when it's done to um destigmatize mental illness. I think it was used a lot in stories like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. By the way, I do really enjoy that film, mostly because I think that film highlights a big issue in how society treats mental illness, and how in many healthcare systems it's ripe for abuse. But that is also like a commentary. Like, if you're using mental illness in a horror story, it has to be done in terms of a commentary critique on the um, injustices done, the stigmas done, and I think it should be used as a commentary to destigmatize. But if you're not going to do that, if you're just going to use it as sort of like, my character has schizophrenia, and that's why they do X, Y, and Z, it's like, no, I do agree. Like, stop using it. It's not needed. Does nothing to get your audience engaged. It only does harm. If you're going to incorporate a mental illness into your horror story, there has to be a broader um, commentary, and it would only be appropriate if you're trying to destigmatize the mental illness, not to re-stigmatize it or stigmatize it further, if that makes sense.
Mental illness like that and make them the antagonist, oh, just because they're crazy.
Yeah,
Now,
exactly.
I
Yeah,
love M. Night
she's
Shyamalan.
100%
He
right.
is one of, if not my favorite director, but he does this probably the worst out of anybody. And almost every single one of his movies involves someone who is mentally ill and being violent. So he does it the worst. And, you know, still love him. I love all his movies so, so much. Again, mental illness, not off the table when it comes to horror. You can absolutely do that. In fact, I
Yeah,
think
see,
most
we
movies
agree.
do, because obviously if you're killing people, you're doing this, you're doing that, there's some kind of something going on. But you could do it without exploiting a specific mental illness or exploiting mental
I'm
illness,
gonna
period.
I think I'm gonna stop this video. I'm gonna stop watching this one here. If you want to uh see the rest of this video, because I think I'm just gonna basically be agreeing with most of what she says, with my own sort of like maybe little caveats added, but for the most part, I do agree. So her channel is Possessed by Horror. This video was Horror Movie X. Can we not please? Definitely go check them out if you're definitely more interested. Everything is like